morning. So this year at BASIS Oro Valley, we've been extremely excited to introduce what we call the Mind Your Mind class. And this class is all about exploring mindfulness concepts and various ways they can be applied to students' lives. Now, from a personal perspective, I've been interested in mindfulness for about 5 years now. It was actually a friend of mine who just told me about this incredible book he had read one day and opened me up to all these ideas that I hadn't necessarily considered before. Now, if you're not familiar with mindfulness or you're not sure how to incorporate it into your life, I'm going to be offering you a little bit of a perspective today on how you can take something that you already do, something perhaps that occupies quite a bit of your time, and apply mindfulness concepts to that as a way of learning these concepts. So this is really going to be a story about the beginning of my mindfulness journey and how I started to incorporate mindfulness into my life. Now, one of the things that I spend a lot of my spare time doing is landscaping. And it is an activity that I find immensely enjoyable. Yet, like anything in life, it can also have some drawbacks. It can be stressful. It can produce some anxiety. So as opposed to taking these mindfulness concepts that I had been learning and trying to apply them to, say, my job or parts of life that were maybe a higher stress level, I thought, well, maybe I'll try to apply mindfulness to my landscaping and see if that will be a way in which I can practice and learn some mindfulness concepts. So landscaping is an activity, like many pastimes, that can reduce stress. It's relaxing, it gives you a sense of accomplishment, it's a great opportunity for exercise. But it can become stressful. The more investment you put in your landscape, then the more you feel that there is to lose. The more you start to get attached to things. And these are causes of stress and anxiety. So different people you talk to will define mindfulness differently. From my perspective, mindfulness is about being aware of your thoughts and feelings, but not judging yourself when you recognize certain patterns in your thoughts and feelings. So the following are mindfulness concepts that really are metaphorical through the landscaping examples I'm going to be using here. So this is really about the metaphors between landscaping and mindfulness, but I will promise to not incorporate any fertilizer jokes along the lines of life gives you a bag of, etc. You fill in the rest. And I think you're going to find that these are mindfulness concepts you can apply to any aspect of your life. So one of the themes that comes up constantly in the Mind Your Mind class is the idea of finding a balance. We have found dozens and dozens and dozens of ways this applies to just about every part of our lives. And I've just chosen a few examples here and how they relate to landscaping. So when you acquire plants, just like anything else, it's an asset. It's something that you can enjoy, but it also becomes a liability. It's something that you have to take care of. It can become a source of problems. And it's really a matter of finding the balance between how much do you want to have versus how much can you manage. The more time you put into maintaining and building your landscape, then the less time you have to just sit back and enjoy it. Once again, we come to the idea of finding a balance. In the desert, water use is a really big issue. So we have to weigh what are we putting into our landscape versus what are the benefits for humans and wildlife. And finally, risk versus reward. I had a really interesting conversation with a friend one day about certain plants in Tucson that are right on the border of whether they can handle our winter temperatures. And the question really is, do I keep this plant in a pot or do I plant it in the ground? Now, my friend pointed out that there was really a beautiful metaphor here. It really had to do with not taking risks, which limits your growth, versus taking those risks, which affords you much more opportunity for growth. And once again, like anything else, we have to find a balance when weighing these. Now, the next mindfulness theme is something that I really hope our students take to heart. And it's about achievement and accomplishment and how it has to be a personal thing for you as opposed to being about other people's perception of you. So satisfaction with what you have accomplished has to come from inside. If we are constantly comparing ourselves to others and their accomplishments, that's going to be an endless source of suffering. Inner peace really must stem from inside. It cannot be about what other people think of you or how your achievements compare to theirs. So from a landscaping perspective, perhaps you put a lot of time and energy into your landscape, and your neighbor happens to be, well, this individual. Well, if you're constantly going to compare yourself to that, probably going to be pretty hard to find that inner peace and be really happy with what you've accomplished. Perhaps the picture isn't the best possible choice. This is clearly not a Tucson landscape. Clearly that's from Scottsdale. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of people jump to when they first buy a home and begin to landscape is this urge to fill the void. They see a lot of empty space, and the natural instinct is to want to fill it up. And you go to Home Depot, and they've got hundreds of different plants, and very quickly your yard starts to look like the garden center at Home Depot. So by slowing down that impulsiveness and actually asking yourself, is this something I really want? Is this something that is going to benefit me? As opposed to, there's some empty space, here's something that I can put in it. So it's important to remember, a cluttered life is not necessarily a full life. This is a quote that I recently discovered by a classical composer named Gustav Holst, and I think this quote is just brilliant in how it applies to so many different parts of life. Never compose anything unless the not composing of it becomes a positive nuisance to you. And I think this is all about avoiding that impulsive urge to create for the sense of creating, to get something simply because it's available, to stick something there simply because there's an empty space. So I've developed my own strategy from a landscaping perspective. If I'm out in my yard and I see a spot that is empty, and maybe I automatically envision something that I think would fit well there, well, I'm not going to run out and buy that right away. I'm going to wait a while, and I'm going to see if that thought continues to play out. If every time I see that space, I see that image, I have that image, now I can say, all right, I think there's some real inspiration there. This is not just an impulsive urge. Now, while you do have empty space, you can simply shift your focus from the empty space to what is there. Even in this almost entirely empty yard, if you created one little sanctuary in a corner, then that could be something you enjoy every time you're out in your yard. There's no reason that you have to be focusing on all the emptiness and what could be there when you could be thinking about what already is here. The next mindfulness concept that we discuss a lot in the Mind Your Mind class is something called the negative attentional bias. And this is a human tendency to focus on that which seems wrong. We ruminate on things. We continue to play them out in our minds because they bother us, because they don't seem right to us. And through mindfulness, through being aware of your thought patterns, you can shift your focus from that which doesn't seem right to that which is right. So I'm going to share a little story about this one. This picture shows what used to be my beautiful 3-foot Peruvian Sirius, and recently became a 1-foot Peruvian Sirius and lunged for a javelina. Naturally, when I discovered this in my yard, I wasn't too pleased. I had put years of maintenance and effort into this plant, and along came this javelina and decided that it looked tasty. So while I was allowing myself to be focused on what had been a negative occurrence, I was ignoring beautiful things that were happening just a few feet away. And I realized that even when something seems wrong in your life, there's always wonderful positive things that we can shift our attention to. And that actually brings me to my next theme, which is showing compassion to your enemies, even when they eat your plants and smell horrible. So javelinas are a nuisance for a lot of desert gardeners. They seem to have an endless appetite. They're always wandering through our yards looking for your favorite plant and ignoring all the ones that you're planning on getting rid of anyway. So they seem to have this incredible ability to pick out those plants we cherish most and devour them at the first opportunity. So I had actually recently read a story about a neighborhood in Tucson that had decided to relocate the javelina herd that was causing such problems in their neighborhood. Now, if you know that much about wildlife, you realize that relocating usually means death for the animals. And even though I had been battling these javelinas now for several years, they had caused me so much frustration, this idea of uprooting them and moving them somewhere else just did not seem right to me. So what I decided to do was try to understand why the javelinas were doing what they're doing. What was motivating them? And it's a simple quest, of course, for the easiest food source in their case. Now, what I decided to do was fence off my backyard and put all my tastier plants there while leaving the front yard open for them to come through. So it was really just a matter of understanding them and finding a way that we could coexist. This is another theme that I really hope our students think carefully about, because in school it is very easy to focus entirely on grades, which are seen as the outcome of all the effort that you put in. And mindfulness, to me, is greatly about detaching yourself from outcomes, loving the process, cherishing the process, and not having expectations. So if you let go of expectations, you're no longer setting yourself up for possible disappointments. The results of our efforts in life are often outside of our control. There are so many factors of influence beyond ourselves that determine how the things we care about are going to turn out. So I'd like to share another story here. Last spring, I went to the Desert Botanical Gardens in Phoenix. Absolutely stunning place. If you haven't been there, definitely make the trip. And last spring, they had recently transported a 37-foot Boojum Tree, which is a unique plant indigenous to Baja California. They had taken from a resident's yard who had donated it in Tucson and brought it all the way to Phoenix and planted it at the Desert Botanical Gardens. So you can see here this large frame they had built around the plant, and this is actually a structure that was holding it up while they tried to get it to root. Now, while visiting the Desert Botanical Gardens again recently, I was saddened to learn that the plant had unfortunately succumbed to disease and died. And the docent at Desert Botanical Gardens told me what a blow that had been to their community there. But whether or not the plant survived really was the outcome of all the effort they had put into transporting it. And I imagine that many other positive things resulted from this project, people working together that might not have ever met otherwise, the amount of knowledge and experience that was acquired. So there were certainly positive aspects to the entire endeavor, even though the outcome wasn't necessarily what everyone had desired. So I'd like to finish with a thought that I think is perhaps the root of mindfulness for me, and it's the idea of awareness. Being present in the moment. And when you find your activity in which you're going to try to incorporate and learn mindfulness, think about everything that can help put you in that moment, help you absorb that experience. So from a landscaping perspective, there are truly wonderful sensory inputs that we can focus on. There's the sound of the birds, the smell of the plants, just the feel of the dirt in your hands. It really helps put you in that moment as opposed to fixating on your worries or concerns or past problems. So reconnecting with your senses can help you really take stock of what's happening in that moment and can help you from absorbing yourself in things that you don't want to be thinking about while you're trying to absorb that experience. Putting judgment aside, when you do find that you're working on something you love and you are having other thoughts, you are worrying perhaps about something that you think might happen later that day or later that week, don't become frustrated with yourself. Just make a note of it and work to shift that thought process. And finally, the idea that anything can be a meditation. And by meditation, to me, that means something that connects you to that present moment. So if you've perhaps tried to learn mindfulness before and become frustrated and given up, perhaps you're not familiar with the concepts at all, I would encourage you to choose an activity that you already enjoy, but something that perhaps does take up a lot of your time. And see if you can learn these mindfulness skills and concepts through that activity and then apply them to other aspects of your life. I truly hope these mindfulness concepts can benefit you as much as they have benefited me. Thank you.